Hello, and welcome to this session on connecting to APIs in Tableau Prep and how you can configure TabPy to run on Tableau Prep Conductor so you can leverage your Python scripts on your Tableau server. We're going to talk through a few stages to this process in today's session. So first of all, we're going to look at how you can configure a Python script to call an exchange rate API and have this run in Tableau Prep Builder by setting up TabPy on your local machine. Then we're going to dive into how you can set up TabPy on a server using a virtual machine on AWS. And then finally, we're going to look at how you can configure your Tableau Prep Conductor to call this TabPy server so you can run your Python scripts on your own Tableau server. So the first stage of this process is looking at how we can connect to an exchange rate API and bring that into Tableau Prep. So what we have here is a relatively simple workflow which calls my currency API here. I've also got some customer sales data down here in the pink, and then I've joined these together to convert my sales data from a number of different currencies into GBP. So you can see here we've got a whole list of transactions that will come through, and we can see that we've got a number of different currencies. So we have our data in Australian dollars, Canadian dollars, euros, and US dollars. I've used this example as sort of a dummy situation where you may have sales data in different currencies that you want to convert to your local currency and how you can achieve that using Tableau Prep. So the stages I've taken to do that are to insert some dummy data up here in the blue, which is then going to be overwritten by this Python script that calls an exchange rate API. So we can see here we have a whole load of different rates. If I bring this up a little bit, for a number of different currencies across a date period. So I've brought in those currencies and their rates. I split them out into date and the currency code and their rate, and then we've joined our sales data to our currency data. And then there's some basic data prep here just to fill in any missing rates. So for some days there weren't any values for a particular rate. So here I've configured I've generated a weekly average rate, and then further down the line I've generated a monthly average rate to replace any dates where there may not have been a rate. Obviously, it's probably not best practice to be doing this. You wouldn't necessarily do this in a business scenario, but just for the purpose of this exercise, that's what I did. And then at the end of this, I've converted my sales data into GBP. So we can see at the end, I've got my currency codes, I've got the rate for those currencies, I've got my spend in Great British Pounds, and I've got my spend in the local currency from the beginning. Then output this file to a data source on Tableau Server. I've also outputted my rates data to its own table on Tableau Server, so another user could potentially utilize this data going forward. So the key part of this is what's hidden in this scripting tool. We can see that this is connected to my TabPy server, but we're going to come onto that in a little bit. We're just going to talk through the Python script that gets this data for me. So it's saved here as this currency converter.py. It's a Python script, and I'm just going to talk you through the steps that are involved in that script to call the currency API. So over here on the left, we can see this is the exchange rate API that I've called. It comes from the European Central Bank. It's pretty straightforward to use. There's not too many parameters, but you can get historical rates, you can set your base rate, you can call for particular time periods, so you can customize it in quite a few different ways. Over here on my right, I have my Python script that I call in Tableau Prep. So you can see up here, that's the script name that I've called in Tableau Prep. I'll just talk you through this briefly. I'm no Python expert. I put this together just doing a bit of Googling. So I would encourage people to get out there and try their hand at this. It can take a bit of trial and error, but eventually you'll get there. So I've imported my libraries here at the top. I've imported pandas, I've imported requests, and I've imported this datetime function, which I'm going to use to make sure that my rates that I bring back for date period is dynamic. I'll show you this as I go through in Jupyter Notebook on the left-hand side. So I've imported my libraries. I've then defined this function flatten JSON. I found this online somewhere. I didn't come up with it myself. I can cite in the links where I got this from, so other people can go and dig it out. But essentially, the data I get back from the API is in a nested JSON form, and so I need to flatten it. I'll show you that later in the video, but we need to essentially just define this function. Otherwise, when I go to process the JSON later, I get my data all as one big string, which is not what I need. So then if we scroll down a little bit, this is where I start to actually construct my data that I want to use in Tableau Prep. So in order to call this function, my currency API, I need to have a data frame that I'm going to overwrite. So here you can see that I've created a dummy data frame to put into the function and overwrite. So I've just made a data frame with column dummy and put in the values 1, 2, 3. So this is where I'm defining my function to call the exchange rate API, and this is what I can show you now in Jupyter Notebook. So on this line here with URL, I've defined the URL that I'm going to call. You can see it's hitting the exchange rate API. I'm looking for historical data, and then I've defined the parameters. So I've started at the 1st of January 2019, and then I'm going to end my search at the date time of today. That's why at the beginning of the script, I needed to bring in the datetime function. So all I've specified here is the end date in this format, year, month, day, to fit the parameter correctly. And then I've also defined my base currency that I want to return, which is Great British Pounds. I then put my parameters and my URL into this request.get, which is going to call the API for me and bring back some data. And now if we look at the response that I've defined here in its JSON format, we can see the exchange rates that have been returned from the exchange rate API. Now you can see here from all the curly brackets that this JSON is nested. So what I want to do is use my flatten JSON function that I defined earlier in order to get that into a suitable data frame. So I've assigned my response.json to a variable data, and then the next stage is to flatten the JSON using this function and write it to a data frame, which I'm doing here. And then if we look at the first 3 rows of that data frame, we can now see we've got our rates here in this column, which is labeled 0, and the date, the currency for that particular rate. Now at the moment, this field, the rates, the date, and the currency is being used as an index for the table. So I've had to reset the index using this reset index. And now if we preview the data again, we can see that we have a field called index and we have our rates. And now we have a new index that starts at 0. Next stage I want to take is to rename my columns. So I'm going to name date, currency, and rate. And now we can see that reflected in this table. The next step I want to take, at the bottom of my table, I have the start date and the end date and the base currency, essentially my parameters that I entered into the URL. I want to remove these, so I'm going to call df.head -3, which is going to remove the last 3 rows from the data set. So now if I call dftail again, we're going to see that the bottom 3 rows, we no longer have these values up here. We've got rid of them. Finally, I want to cast the data types for my 2 fields. So I'm going to set my date currency to a string and my rate to a float. And we can just check the data types here. And that confirms that we have a string. In Python, a string may be referred to as an object, and we have our rate as a float. Finally, this larger section is just a repeat of what's going on over here in Visual Studio. It's just putting all the stages that I've just explained to you into one function. So if we define that and then we call our currency API, we'll see that we now have a table in the format that we'd like to bring into Tableau Prep. So that's our Python script. We need to set up our Python script in the scripting tool in Tableau Prep. So the next stage we're going to look at is how you can configure TabPy on your local machine and connect that up to Tableau Prep Builder. Call our Python script in Tableau Prep Builder. We need to make sure that we have TabPy configured on our local machine. So TabPy is a server that runs alongside Tableau Desktop or Tableau Prep Builder that can run and execute Python scripts. So you can use these in your analysis. In order to install TabPy, first of all, we need to make sure that we have Python running on our machine. You can check that by entering the command python --version into your command prompt, and it will return the version number up here. So you can see that my Python version is 2.7.14. You may also have Python 3, which is the later version of Python installed. And to check that version, you can type python 3-version. You may not have Python 2 installed on your machine, in which case, if you just run the code Python version, you should see your Python 3 version returned. If you don't have Python installed in your machine, you can go to python.org/downloads, and you will be taken to this download page where you can download the latest version of Python for your operating system. Once you download this file, you'll be taken through a visual installer, and it's a straightforward process. I'm not going to run through it in this session. As you can see, I've already got Python installed on my machine, so I'm just going to move on to how we can download and configure TabPy. So to get TabPy, there's a whole GitHub page which is now managed by Tableau in the latest version of 1.0. TabPy version 1.0. Before this release, I don't think it was actually supported and managed by Tableau. It was more of just an extension that you could use, whereas in the latest version, this is actually managed and maintained by Tableau. So we can go down to this README section, and it's quite heavily documented here. You can see that really you want Python version 3 to run TabPy, and if we click through this documentation, we get some more information about setting up and configuring TabPy. So if we just go to these installation instructions, it will explain how you can install TabPy and then how you can start up TabPy. So the first stage you want to do is to make sure pip is installed and updated. So pip is a Python library installer. It may come with your Python download, it may not. So if you just run this line of code, python pip install -- upgrade pip in your command prompt, you can see that it's actually found I had pip already installed, but it's uninstalled the old version and installed a later version. And you can also see from this error message up here that Python 2.7 is no longer being maintained, so it's best to use Python 3. So the next step we want to do is to run this line of code that will install TabPy as a package. So we can just take this from the GitHub page and do pip install TabPy. I will probably get a error message telling me that TabPy has already been installed. Or not. Oh yeah, no, we can see here, requirement already satisfied. That's because I already have TabPy installed on my machine, ready to go. You will probably get some slightly different code here telling you that it's installing and downloading TabPy and setting it up for you. So the final step we want to do is to start up TabPy and have it running on our local machine. In order to do that, you just have the simple command of TabPy. Now you can configure your TabPy server to run with slightly different configuration instructions. So these can be found in this GitHub page here. There are all sorts of custom settings, so you can have TabPy listen on different ports. You can assign usernames and passwords to the TabPy server if you want to make things slightly more secure. You can modify the timeout time of the query or the maximum request size. So you can customize your TabPy server quite a bit. They recommend not to really alter the default settings unless you really need to. So for this session, we're just going to keep our TabPy server running off the default the default settings. If you do want to set it up to run with your special config file, you need to just point the TabPy command to that configuration file when you start up the TabPy server. And you can see on this GitHub page, you've got an example of what this configuration file should look like. So we're just going to start up TabPy in the usual way. So if in my command prompt, I just enter TabPy, we can now see that it's been initialized, it's been set up, and you can see this last line is important. We can see that this web service is now listening on port 9004. So this is where we can connect Tableau Prep Builder to TabPy. So what we want to do in our scripting tool is hit connect to Tableau Python server, and now we get this configuration box. So the server, because it's running on our local machine, the username or the server name is just localhost. You'll see later on in the session when we set this up on an AWS Linux machine that we'll put in a IP address for this, so we are hitting a different server. But for now, we'll just use localhost. And then the port number is 9004, as we saw down here. And we can leave the username and password blank as we didn't set up any configuration file. If we hit sign in, there's no actual way of testing the connection in Tableau Prep Builder at the moment. You'll just get an error really if it's not working. We can then browse to our file. So as mentioned earlier, that's our currency converter.py. the script that I've written. And then you also have to type which function you're calling in the script. So you saw in my script earlier, there were two functions defined. One was the flatten JSON function, and the second one was the call currency API function. So that's what we're looking at here. And finally, at the end of the Python script, you might have noticed there was a third function, which was called getOutPutSchema. Let me just get it back up for you. So we can see right down the bottom here, I might have skimmed over it earlier, we've got this define getOutPutSchema. So this is necessary in Tableau Prep if the output of your Python script is different to what went into the tool. So we can see in Prep that I had this this dummy field. So obviously what's coming out of the scripting tool is different to what went into it. So then I have to define my two field names, which are date currency and rate, and you also have to define their field types. So this is prep string and prep decimal. There's documentation on this on Tableau's website, so I can point you to that. If we just go to running, here we go, use Python script in your flow. There's some instructions here, like I've just run through, and then it talks about this getOutPutSchema and the function in Python that you need to define to configure the resulting data types, and an example here. So going back to our script, if we now click on our scripting tool, it's going to try and run the flow, and we can see over here in my terminal window that it's actually run the Python script. You can see this is my script that can be seen in VS Code here, is over in the terminal, and we've got no errors. The script's run, we've got some data here. So that's looking all good. So that's how you can set up TabPy to run on your local machine. But the purpose of this session is to configure TabPy to run on Tableau Prep Conductor on our Tableau server. So in order to do that, we need to have TabPy constantly running on a different server so that the Tableau server can call that TabPy server and run scripts whenever we want. Because if you see here, if I close down this terminal window, it's going to terminate any processes running in this window. You could have this run in the background, but you might turn off your local machine, you might turn off your laptop. If you want something that's robust and is going to stay stable on your Tableau server, it's probably best to set this up on another machine. So if we terminate this, now when I go back and I try to go to my currency API, it's going to error because this connection now doesn't exist. The TabPy server has been terminated, so there's nowhere it can't connect to this port. It's not listening. We'll see these alerts. Can't find the field, unable to connect. If I start up my terminal window again, and it's already running, if we just do a new window and just do TabPy, it's going to boot up, it's listening again. We go back to if we redo our connection, we should see our fields start to come through again. There we go, we've got our rates, so the connection's back up. But the next stage of this video is going to look at how we can set up one of these machines on AWS. You could set up the virtual machine in another way, but it's just the way I've chosen to do it, and how we can download our TabPy server and run it on that Linux machine. In the process is setting up a virtual machine on AWS that can sit and run TabPy server in the background, and then we can connect our Tableau Prep Builder up to that machine, and then eventually we'll connect our Tableau Prep Conductor to that machine so we can configure this flow to run on our Tableau server. So in order to do that, we're going to have to create an EC2 instance on AWS. So I'm going to walk you through that process. We're then going to SSH into that machine. We're going to download Python, and we're going to download TabPy and set that up to run in the background. So what we're going to do now is we're going to head over to AWS and log into the management console. If you don't have an account with AWS, you can create one. AWS have a whole free tier program where you can start to spin up machines for free, and it won't cost you anything. So to follow along in this part of the process, the machine we're going to set up is part of the free tier, so you don't have to worry about any costs being incurred. When you set up the account, you may have to put in some card details, but as I mentioned, if you follow along correctly, we won't be charged for anything. So I'm going to sign in to the portal. Just going to log in, and I've got this multi-factor authentication on my account, so I just need to put that in. Just wait for the next one to come through. Okay, so we're in the AWS Management Console. We're going to spin up an EC2 machine. We've got one running instance. So this is actually what we're going to set up. I set this up yesterday. Just to check everything was running, but we're actually I'm just going to terminate this instance, and we're going to start from scratch. So that's going to go in the background. What we're going to do is we're going to go to Launch Instance, the big blue button, and we're going to select this first option, the AWS Linux 2 AMI. It's free tier eligible, so we know we're not going to pay for anything. We want to select that. We're going to get asked to choose our instance type. So you can see there are a whole load of different machines that you can set up for different purposes. They have different compute powers, different memories. We're just going to go with this general purpose T2 micro free tier eligible to configure TabPy. We don't need a massively powerful machine because it's just going to sit there in the background and process the one Python script. Perhaps if you were running really hefty Python scripts, you might want a more powerful server, but that's what's great with AWS. You could quickly scale this up or down depending on the needs of your server. So we're not going to hit review and launch yet. We're going to go to configure our instance details. There are a whole load of settings here. We don't really need to tweak any of these for this purpose. You can configure your EC2 in a quite detailed way. All we want to do is make sure that we have a public IP address. So here we can see use subnet setting is set to enable. We're just going to double check that by putting it to enable. Having a public IP address allows us to connect to this machine in TabPy. It allows us to connect to TabPy in Tableau Prep Builder. So when we go to connect, we will put in the EC2's public IP address into this server name. That's how we can connect to it. So we're just going to make sure we've got a public IP address. We're going to go to add storage. We can leave that as it is. You can see here that free tier customers are eligible to up to 30 gigabytes. we're going to leave that as 8 for now because we don't need any more. Go to add tags. Again, we don't really need to do this for the purpose of this. The next stage is important though. We want to SSH into our machine. So we want to, on my local machine, I'm going to SSH into the AWS machine so I can set up some of these properties. So what we want to do is we can configure the SSH type port. It's going to be on port 22, and then here we can set up custom IP. We can do anywhere, or we can hit my IP. If I hit my IP, it will just set this up so only I can SSH into this machine. If we do anywhere, that means anyone can SSH into the machine. You're going to get a warning from AWS if you do that because you're opening it up to the world. You may not want to do that really, but for this purpose, I'm just going to do that. And we can enter a description, SSH for tab.py server. We also need to add another custom rule. And as we've mentioned before, that tab.py listens on port 9004 by default, unless you change this in your config file. So what we want to do is add a custom TCP protocol, and we're going to put in our port range, we want to put in 9004. Again, we're just going to set this up so anywhere can listen in, and we're just going to define this as port for server. So if you didn't do this second part, if you didn't open up the 9004 port, you would go through this process. You could download Python, you could download tab.py on your Linux machine, you could have it running, but then when you went to connect to your server in here, you'd get an error because your server wouldn't be set up to allow any traffic through this port 9004. We can just define this security group name so we know what it is as tab.py server tutorial, and then we can review and launch our machine. So here we just check everything's right that we want. We can see here that we've got our custom security group. At this point we could go back and edit anything that we don't want or we think's wrong. Again, we've got a warning from AWS saying that our tab.py server tutorial security group is open to the world. So we've allowed anyone access to it. That's fine. We're just going to use it for this tutorial and then we're going to shut it down. So it's not a problem. But a more practical case would be to set up the IP addresses that you want to be able to hit this server. So maybe the IP address of your local machine, the IP address of your Tableau server, and so the machine that your Tableau server is running on. So further down the line, you can connect Tableau Prep Conductor to this AWS machine. So we're going to hit launch. We need to create a key pair. This allows us entry into the AWS machine. So this part is important because once you've downloaded this key pair, you won't be able to get it back. So make sure it's saved in a suitable location. So I'm just going to call this tab.py server tutorial. It's going to create a new key pair. I'm going to hit download key pair. And so I can see that that's come through to my downloads folder. And then I'm going to launch this instance. So if we go to our instances, we can see my one from before that's been terminated, and now we're just setting up this top one. So we can see we've now got a public IP address that we're going to use later on to connect TabPy and Tableau Prep Builder to this machine. It's pending, we're just waiting for it to set up. I've got my my private key down here that we're going to use when we connect, and we're just going to wait for this to get up and running. Linux machine is up and running. We're going to connect into that. So I've now got my terminal window over here on the left-hand side of my screen, and we're going to SSH into this Linux machine. So what we're going to do is we're going to hit connect up here, and this is fine, connect to our instance using a standalone SSH client. The first thing we need to do is make sure that the key is not publicly viewable. That may be the case anyway on your machine, but I'm going to make sure mine isn't, so it's best to just run this anyway. What you need to do is go to the location which you downloaded that private key to. So in my case, that was my downloads folder. So I'm just going to change this directory to my downloads. So we can see now that I'm in the downloads folder, and I'm going to run this. Can actually copy and paste it straight from AWS. So I'm just going to take this and run it here, and that will have made sure that the key is not publicly viewable. So now what I can do is take this example down here, and this is going to SSH into my Linux machine using the private key that we've just configured to not be public. So if I just copy and paste that in, it's going to ask me if I'm sure I want to continue connecting. I'm going to hit yes, and now we can see that we're in our Linux machine. We can see it's an EC2 user at the IP address. That will be the private IP address. So you can see that down here, which is the location that we're at. And now we can start setting up TabPy on this Linux machine. So the first stage, it's a very similar process to what we followed on our local machine. We first need to make sure that we have Python installed and we have pip installed. We then need to download TabPy using the pip installer, and then we need to get TabPy up and running. So what we're going to do, we're going to check that Python isn't installed on this machine, and we confirm that with Python 3 command not found. So what we're going to do is use this command, sudo yum install Python 3.7, and we can see that it's got Python for us. It's going to ask if that's okay. We're going to say Y for yes, and it's going to run and install our Python packages. And then here we go, get a message at the bottom, complete. And if we double check our version again, Python 3 version, we've got our Python version here, Python 3.7.6. So the next step that we need to take is to get the pip installer. Now obviously this is a Linux machine, there is no UI to it, it's just a command line. So in order to download the pip installer, we're going to run this command. We're going to wget and then this web address, so https bootstrap.pypa.io/get pip.py. So this is a Python script that will get pip installed for us. So if we hit that, we can see that using the wget function, we've downloaded that file from the web, and we've now got it saved as getpip.py. And now we can use Python to run that in that file, which is going to install pip for us. So we're going to do Python 3 get pip.py user, and now we should get an installer. Here we go. It's successfully installed pip. It's downloaded everything it needs, and we've got pip install. So now that we've got pip installed on our Linux machine, we can go and install TabPy as we did before. So what we're going to do is type pip install TabPy. So it's going to go and search for that TabPy package and install it. Here we go. It's downloading everything it requires. It shouldn't take too long to do this. It's just now installing the collected packages. So it comes with a load of things like libraries such as pandas, NumPy, which we can then utilize in Tableau Desktop or Tableau Prep. And there we go, successfully installed, and we're back to our command prompt. So now we have TabPy, we can run that, and there we go. Now we have TabPy up and running on this machine. That's great. We can now test that out. We've got it listening on port 9004. So if we now go back to Tableau Prep Builder and reconfigure our scripting tool, we can take this public IP address. I'm going to copy it to my clipboard from my AWS Management Console. I'm going to replace the server name with that IP address, and then it's listening on port 9004. I'm going to hit sign in. And now our error messages have gone. We have got our script running on our AWS server. Just to confirm that, we can go back and you can see here in our Linux machine that it's taking in our Python script and running it on the server. Now that's great, although we're at the same point now that we were on our local machine, in that if I shut down this window and disconnect my session to the Linux machine, this TabPy instance will shut down. So what we're going to do is close it down anyway. So it's shutting down TabPy. What we're going to do now is use what's called the screen message. The screen method to have TabPy running in the background. So essentially what I do is I generate a new screen that I can run processes in the Linux machine, and then I detach that screen from this session. So when I then sign out of this session from my local machine, it will sit and run there in the background. So in order to do that, we need to type in screen into our Linux machine, and we now have a new screen that we're in. So what I can do now is do TabPy, and we'll get TabPy up and running. And now if I hit Control A and then followed by D, you can now see that we have been detached from this screen, screen number 3648. We're back in the original screen. This shutting down TabPy is from before. So now what I can do is to check that TabPy is still running. If I enter ps-a, I can see my processes that are running in the background, and we can see that TabPy is still running. We can confirm that by going to our Tableau Prep Builder, and it's still sitting there running. So that's great. Just to confirm that, what we're going to do is we're going to leave this running. We can come out of this SSH session actually. If we do Sorry, we're going to shut down this terminal window. We're going to terminate the process, and now we've got our terminal here. We're going to SSH back into that machine. So you can see that I'm out of that Linux instance now. We can see that my flow is still running, Tableau Prep Builder. We're still connected to that server. Whereas if I had shut down without the screen, the TabPy process would have kept running and wouldn't have kept running, and we would have lost connection to this. So what we can do is go back into our machine. I'm just going to go to my downloads folder. I'm going to go back to connect. I'll copy this line from AWS, and we're back in our machine. So we're back into this Linux machine. We can do our ps-a, and we've got TabPy still running. So if we want to go back into that screen, we can look for our screen names. So if we go screen-ls, we can see that we've got one detached screen with the ID 3648 as before. So if we want to go into that screen, we can go screen-r, and then we want to put the screen ID 3648. And now we can see that we're back in our screen. We've got TabPy running, it's running our Python script, that's great. If you then wanted to kill this process or to kill this screen off, what you can do is Control A and then hit K, and you get, are you ready to kill this window? If you hit yes, now we can see that our screen has been terminated. By doing that, it should have terminated TabPy running. So if we go back to ps-a, we can see that that TabPy process has gone now. If we come back in here, we're going to see this error out because the server's not running, and that's what we want to see just to prove that our screen is working. We'll just quickly go back in and set that up. So we're going to go into screen, we're going to go into TabPy, got that running, it's listening on port 9004. We're going to go Control A, D, we're going to detach from the screen, and that is fine for now. So that's the next step in our process. We've set up our AWS machine, we've opened up port 9004 so we can listen from Tableau Prep Builder. We've then downloaded Python and the pip installer to our Linux machine. We've set up TabPy using a screen, so now we have that process running there in the background. Just to double check, we're going to do ps.a, got TabPy running there. That's great. So the next step that we're going to take is to set up our Tableau Prep Conductor to call this TabPy server on the AWS machine, and we can set that up. We can then publish this flow to our Tableau server and have it running on the server. So the final stage in this process is configuring our Tableau server to point to our AWS machine that's running TabPy. So we can publish these flows on Tableau server that use a scripting tool and have them run successfully on server. If I was to just publish this script as it is at the moment to my Tableau server, it would publish okay, as there's no errors in the script. But when I run it on the server, it would tell me that there was an error because Tableau Prep Conductor doesn't know what TabPy server to point at. So we have to configure that on the Tableau server itself. So over here, I've SSH'd into the Linux machine that hosts our Tableau beta server. And we can just confirm that that's got the server running on it by running the command tsm status. this will just check the status of our server, and we can see that it's running all okay. So that's great. We're ready to set up the server to point to the AWS machine. So where you can get the bit of code that you need to run on your Tableau server is from this article, How to Leverage Python Scripts in Your Flow from Tableau. This talks through the process of what we've done, downloading Python, make sure you've got TabPy. This is the part that we need to configure the Tableau Python TabPy server for Tableau server. And we're going to run through these stages. Again, further down here, it talks about what we mentioned earlier, creating a Python script and also the functions for that get output schema. So what we want to do here, we want to open the TSM command line, which is what we've got over on the left. And then we want to run this command to configure TabPy. There are various parameters that you can enter here. We're actually only going to run this up to here where we define the port. So what we want to do is enable the connection type. You can either do a secure or a unsecured connection. If you select the secured option, that's when you specify your config file and you have some more custom user settings. But for this walkthrough, we're just going to go with the default basic settings. So I'll do Maestro TabPy without the secure. I'll then do my TabPy host, so the IP address that we're going to point to. So that's this public IP address from our AWS machine that we're going to point the command to, and then we want the port, which is 9004. We set this up exactly the same as it is set up here in Tableau Prep Builder, so that when I publish this flow to the server, these scripts run just fine because they've got the same configuration. So what I want to do over in here, instead of typing that whole command out, I've actually got it copied somewhere. So I'm just going to copy that and paste it into here. So we can see our connection type is just TabPy, the not secured version. I've got my TabPy host and I've got my port. So if I just hit enter here, it's going to take in that command. It's completed successfully. So to apply these changes, we need to do TSM pending changes apply. It's going to apply this new configuration to our Tableau server. We just hit enter. It's going to ask if it's okay that it reboots the server for us. Here we go. This operation will perform a server restart. Are you sure you wish to continue? I put yes. And now it will restart my server. This process can take a little bit of time, so we're just going to wait until that's done, and we'll start back up the video once the server is back up and running. My Tableau server has now restarted. It's configured and applied the changes. It's back up and running, so we can just double check that it's running okay by running in this command tsm status. We should see that it's back up and running fine. There we go. So now the final stage that we want to take is to publish the flow to the Tableau server and just check that it's running okay. So what we want to do is come back to Tableau Prep Builder. We've got our flow working, it's connected to the AWS machine. What we want to do is go to the server. You can see that I'm already signed in to the server. We're just going to hit publish flow. I'm just going to change this project to my currency API. I'm going to change it to overwrite the existing flow that I have. So we can see that I've just put in a little description of what it's doing, converting the currency from local currency into GBP. It's connecting to my TabPy in AWS. We're going to publish that. It's going to replace what's already there. I'm going to let it run and publish. And then it should bring us to, here we go. So we've got our preview of our data down here, data flow. We've got our scripting tool. This should all run fine. What we're going to do, just to show that the prep conductor is configured to the AWS machine and everything's running correctly, is if we just exit this connection to the Tableau server machine, and we're going to SSH back into our AWS machine using our bit of code here. We're now back in. We need to head to our screen that's running TabPy. So if we go to screen ls, get our list of screens, and then we can see that we've got it on this number 3730. So I'm going to do screen-r 3730, and here we go. We're in. We've got TabPy up and running. So now, if I go back to here, you can see that I tested this out earlier. If we hit run, we should see if we just, okay, it's not going to clear that in there, but if we just hit run in our on our server, we should see that the Python script gets called in the AWS machine. So if we just press run, I'm going to do run now. There we go. It's going to be queued to run. We should see after that clear. There we go. We just saw the function get called. It's executed okay. So we can see that the status is pending. It's probably just writing our outputs now. If we refresh this, we can see that, there we go. We've got a successful run, 12:06, and there we go, times 12:06. So we've successfully configured TabPy on an AWS machine. We've hooked up our Tableau server to call this machine so it can run Python scripts on Prep Conductor. And that's it for the tutorial. I hope that you've enjoyed this session today. I hope it covers off every step that was required for this process. Something I went through a few weeks ago and found there wasn't too much documentation online. So I thought it was good to put something out there that helps someone walk through this process from start to finish. If you've got any questions, feel free to reach out to me on Twitter or LinkedIn. This is my Twitter handle, and you can connect to me on LinkedIn. This is the little bit that you put at the end of a URL to find someone's name. So yeah, I hope you've enjoyed the session and have a good rest of your day.